Indiana is the 9 seed in the Big Ten tournament. They will rematch Oregon at 12 o'clock on Thursday. Today is Wednesday at about 1 p.m. as I record this. Joe Lunardi has the Hoosiers in the last 4 in category. They're the second team down in the last 4 in category, so theoretically there's 2 spots of room for error, I suppose, according to Lunardi. On the bubble, Xavier and Ohio State both below. Indiana is the last teams in. Boise State first team out. Indiana is just above those 3 teams that I mentioned. Jerry Palm has the Hoosiers safely in the field as a 10 seed. So some discrepancy in the bracketology as to where the Hoosiers fall. None of it matters. What matters is the selection committee. The situation to me is winning in, right? Because Indiana right now is in the field, according to both bracketologists, and I'm sure the committee would agree. If you beat Oregon and lose to Michigan State, great. You beat another team that's going to be in the tournament. You beat a tournament caliber team and then lost to a team that's probably a Final Four contender and certainly the Big Ten champion, of course, from the regular season. They won by 3 games. Totally acceptable loss, totally impressive win in the Big Ten tournament. That's what Indiana has to do, win and in. Lose to Oregon, and now we kind of have to start thinking about what Indiana is going to end up doing in the NCAA tournament in terms of whether or not they're going to qualify. Xavier plays on the same day. If they win, it's a new conversation. Ohio State, if they go on a run and they end up being relevant, even though Indiana beat them twice, it's a new conversation. There's some key Mountain West battles, Boise State, Colorado State. Somebody has to win. The SEC as well, Texas, Oklahoma on the bubble. So if you lose, things get a little bit dicey, and it comes down to Selection Sunday, and it comes down to sort of some of these other bubble matchups in terms of whether or not Indiana's making the tournament. You make it very simple by just winning. And after you win, there's, of course, conversation of whether or not this is a first 4 team headed to Dayton or this is a surefire tournament team across the board that's of course, into the route of 64 automatically. If you win, you're in the tournament. That's all it is to me with Indiana. And this Oregon game, as a result, is a big deal. Oregon is in the tournament most likely. I don't see a world where Oregon doesn't make it. But for Indiana, this is crucial. They just lost to Oregon at Oregon. It was close the whole game until Shelstead pulled away and took over in the final minutes. He had 8 points in 90 seconds. Oregon closed on a 10-0 run and ended up winning by just over double digits. The Hoosiers played well, though. They hit some tough shots. Ballo had a double-double. They didn't have quite the gas to match Shelstead in the end. They let up a 10-0 run to lose on the road, as I mentioned, and now they have to win the rematch. So because they lost that game, and then, of course, followed up with a win against Ohio State, now they have to win the rematch in order to guarantee themselves a spot in the tournament. How can it be different this time, right? Number one, it's important to note that it's a pseudo-home game, right? Gainbridge Fieldhouse is effectively a home game. Oregon fans travel well. I'm not gonna denounce that idea. But Indiana's playing in Indianapolis, and they're playing against a team from the Pacific time zone. This is a pseudo-home game for Indiana. That is going to allow the game to potentially bounce in their favor, knowing that last time they went all the way out to Oregon. But the number one issue for me, for Indiana, is defensively winning the ISOs against Jackson Shelstead, because Jackson Shelstead, again, is a takeover guy. He's a guy that in the final minutes, when it's a tie ball game, 64-64, he can make it 74-64 and win the game that way. That's exactly what he did. Oregon was, again, neck and neck with Indiana the whole time, even at Oregon, and Jackson Shelstead took over at the end. So winning the ISO against Jackson Shelstead is very important. Somebody has to go wire to wire with Shelstead for 40 minutes. Now, is it Galloway? Is it Leal? I have no idea. We'll find out and see sort of if we're going back to Galloway in terms of defending Shelstead, or if Coach Wisden's going to make a different decision on that. But somebody's going to have to go wire to Shelstead and at least limit him the whole time if they're going to have to. If IU has to resort to doubling Shelstead or putting in some zone schemes to really scheme Shelstead away from the hoop, I don't know if that's going to work out for Indiana. I don't know if that's going to be what they're looking for. And honestly, Shelstead didn't play that well in this game in the regular season. He just showed up in the final minutes and, of course, won it. So it was not Shelstead's best game against Indiana in the regular season. He has more in the tank, but we saw a flash of what he's capable of and what he will be capable of in the tournament with those final 90 seconds in which he scored 8 points and ended up knocking the Hoosiers off in Oregon. So, again, the ISO defensively against Shelstead. You can't allocate too many resources to him defensively. If somebody can go wire to wire and at least limit him throughout the game, whether that's Galloway, whether that's Leal, Indiana is sitting pretty in a pseudo-home game in the Big Ten tournament, in a must-win game. They absolutely have the capability to win. Again, Oregon's probably a 6 seed. They're in the tournament no matter what. Indiana's on the bubble. This is a better team. that Oregon or that Indiana is facing, right? Oregon is better across the board. Their resume, their talent theoretically, the way their team is built, Oregon's better. So Indiana's got to beat a team better than them in order to guarantee themselves a spot in the NCAA tournament. They can prove they deserve it by beating an NCAA tournament caliber opponent. This is how it happens, right? It happens right here in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and it happens defensively in the isolation against Jackson Shelstead. The other pivot point outside of Shelstead is Indiana having blown opportunities late in games all year long. They kind of just run out of gas at the end of games. The Oregon game, the Maryland game, the UCLA game, Purdue the first time, etc. Plenty of examples of Indiana down the stretch falling apart and losing to an opponent that certainly seemed beatable and was either not quite at their level in the standings or above it. Regardless, Indiana has blown games at the end against teams that are tournament caliber and do have potential to make runs in the NCAA tournament, implying that Indiana is at the level of teams that are capable of making runs in the NCAA tournament. They just haven't been able to beat most of them because they, again, run out of gas at the end. This is a tournament team. The Indiana's a tournament team if they win this game, right? At this time of year, running out of gas at the end of in the final minutes at the end of games is absolutely unacceptable. You have to go out and win it in clutch time. This is the moment for Indiana to prove that they are a tournament team, not just because their resume would probably be good enough with another test against Oregon falling in favor of the Hoosiers, but also because Oregon's a tournament team. It's a great team with a lot of upside and a lot of potential once we get to the actual tournament. Indiana's got to beat them to prove and show, hey, in a neutral site, in a big game against a great player, Jackson Shelstead, and a great team in Oregon, we're capable of going out and winning, and that will then imply that if Indiana ends up as a 10 seed, that they can go out and beat a 7, like Oregon would be. This feels like a first-round game of the NCAA tournament for a lot of reasons. Indiana winning it, to me, proves that they deserve their place in the NCAA tournament. They may not need to win it, but it'd be very, very nice if they did, and it'd be very, very reassuring if they did, and they wouldn't have to sweat on Selection Sunday just with this win on Thursday of the Big Ten tournament. It is simply that simple. Again, Indiana runs out of gas. You cannot run out of gas. And similarly, you have to go wire to wire with Shelstead. Because again, Shelstead was pretty limited for most of that game until Indiana ran out of gas and Shelstead took over and Oregon ends up winning. So Indiana, keep your foot on the gas. You can't let the tank run to empty, and you have to go wire to wire with Shelstead. It's a pseudo home game. It's a must-win game for Indiana. The momentum is on your side after that Ohio State win as well. Go wire to wire with Shelstead and don't run out of gas as a team at the end of the game. And Indiana has a very good chance of winning this game and a very good chance of going to the NCAA tournament. Again, with a win here, they're in the tournament in my opinion. Then they would go on to play Michigan State, who they did beat on the road this month, right? This is the 1 seed in the Big Ten that in the last few weeks they knocked off on the road. UCLA is also the 4 on their side of the bracket. It's not unthinkable to suggest that Indiana has a chance to go on a big-time run, but it all starts in the early window on Thursday, right? It's this simple. The rest of the Big Ten tournament is just noise, in my opinion. If Indiana beats Oregon, they're in the tournament. They're in the NCAA tournament. And if they lose, then you're really going to have to start thinking about it, and you're really going to have to start sweating about bid thieves and sweating about Xavier and Ohio State and Boise State and the Mountain West and the SEC and everything else like that on Selection Sunday. A win makes it simple. Indiana's in. I think that's all there is to it. And then after that, great. If you keep winning and knock off the 1 seed and go on to win the whole thing, great. Right now the focus is beating Oregon, and right now the focus is qualifying for the NCAA tournament as a result. It all starts on the early window on Thursday. It also could all end in the early window on Thursday. A big swing in this 8-9 matchup in the Big Ten tournament. I'm very excited to watch it all play out. Indiana can secure, in my opinion, a place in the NCAA tournament with a win over Oregon. They've got to go wire to wire with Shelstead. They've got to not let their gas tank run to empty by the end of the second half, and that's how Indiana's going to get this one done. That's what I have to say about the Hoosiers.